is that
Yeah.
not even my mother called me Giuseppe. So
okay, you see, that's why I start these recordings early, because things like that fall out and I go, oh, that's a really funny one. Hello and welcome to the Cloud Therapist channel. I'm Richard Simon. This talk is all about cloud journeys, 100 of them actually. It's about a book that someone has written about their experience of migrating that many and more applications to the cloud. And here's the author himself to tell us all about it, Giuseppe Paterno. Hello, Giuseppe, how are you doing?
Hello, I'm fine, thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Excellent. Giuseppe, if you don't mind, I will call you GP from now on, just kind of keep things abbreviated. So Giuseppe, give us a little bit about sort of your background, if you don't mind.
Oh, okay, it's a long one. I've been into the industry for almost 25 years now. I've been working for all the big names, you know, some of them actually don't exist anymore, like some Microsystems. But I was in IBM, Red Hat, Canonical, basically always in open source. And in the last 10 years, I spent time doing cloud infrastructures and cloud migrations. This all was on my last 10 years.
Okay, and your book is called 100 Cloud Journeys, How to Build Tailored Cloud Solutions. I kind of look at it as a sort of since reading it, it kind of looks like a customer therapy for their journey to the cloud. You have a hard copy of it available on Amazon, is that correct? Have you got it handy as well?
Yeah, here it is. Actually.
Here it is.
Yeah, it's
Excellent.
also available for download, actually.
Right,
so
yes, you have. Yes, you have a copy as well on, I believe, your website. So we'll provide the viewers with a link to that in the description of the video. So GP, just kind of tell me a little bit about why you actually decided to write a book about your experience.
So actually, when the pandemic happened 2 years ago, I was stranded here in Milan, and I decided to kind of look back at what happened in the last basically 10 years. And a friend of mine told me, yeah, why don't you collect all your experiences and all actually the mistakes the customer made into the journey. So ended up doing, you know, it should have been a short story, to be honest, but it ended up being a small book. So yeah.
100 stories. Yeah. Excellent. Yeah, I always appreciate, I think the thing I really appreciate as well is that it's not kind of a user guide for migrating to cloud. It is more about those lessons learned, which sometimes, you know, people don't really tend to focus on. They kind of tell you how to do something, but not what the potential things that have gone wrong.
Exactly. That's the thing. When I enjoy writing. This is one thing that was really enjoyable about writing it. But what actually people don't give in books is actually the experience, the architecture, the background when it comes to a solution. Because it's easy to get a book on a given subject, say Python, Perl, or whatever. But the experience is actually when you do all these migrations and all the everyday job.
Okay, and who's kind of your target readers for the book?
So basically, what I had in mind was something like C-level, so CTOs, depending on the size of a company. For bigger company, that would be CTOs and high-level architects or decision makers. Maybe for smallest, could be also suitable for a CEO. But the target was really high level. It's not. I wouldn't say it's not suited for the very technical people, but they give me an overall picture because it's more about the philosophy of a cloud migration rather than the technical detail.
Okay, and in terms of, again, your readers, what do you think they kind of are, you know, coming away, sort of reading the book? What do you think they will gain from it?
So I hope they will gain my experience of, you know, what can go wrong, what could, you know, you could do better, based on the 100 cloud journeys, because you know you kind of adjust your path while you go, And this is, I believe, this is really important.
Indeed. Okay, and I always ask everybody's kind of got a book out, and these are probably typical questions to ask. What was kind of the most enjoyable thing about writing it?
Yeah, was actually writing itself.
Okay.
Because I had the opportunity to work with a journalist as well.
Okay, right.
Again, it was supposed to be a short story, so something like I can add this one, I can add that one, and I peer reviewed with the journalist. I learned a lot from him on how to put things properly for the target I had in mind. Because you know, I'm a technician, so it's the challenging part was that one.
Sure. And in terms of the okay, yeah. So you mentioned that as a challenge. And what else was kind of a challenge for you in the book? Was kind of maybe kind of you had so much to kind of put in there, or something else like that?
Yeah, trying to summarize all the experience
Right.
was really challenging because we'll probably discuss later on about the 6 pillars I brought there, but that was actually a summary of what went wrong and what was actually good. But to go to that kind of summary, I had to work a lot on it and was really challenging.
Okay, sure. Okay, yeah. So let's dive into the actual book content. So obviously, we're not going to be able to kind of cover everything that I did, obviously, for our viewers to go off and get a copy of the book themselves. But you do mention early on, very early on, about the sort of the 6 pillars for success in cloud sort of engagements or projects. Why 6 in particular?
Yeah, I tried to summarize again the mistakes that people did when they did their journey to the cloud. I was aiming at 5, to be honest, but less than 10. So I came up with 6, trying to summarize as with as little points as possible to try to give the readers my point of view and my experience.
Right. Okay. So the first of those is called use open standards and open source. So this is kind of obviously trying to appeal to awareness of kind of vendor lock-in and things like that. Can you kind of talk a little bit more about sort of open source tools and things like that you recommend?
Yeah, it's also it's most of the time is common sense. So the wide available open source projects are the one you should use anyway. The thing I'm really focusing on open standard and open source because the appealing thing about the cloud or a cloud provider is the tool they give you on top. They make the cloud migration or the cloud adoption, especially on the developer part, really easy. Okay, but behind this easiness of adoption, there's a vendor lock-in. So and going outside of that vendor lock-in is something like is not easy. So I try and recommend, let's say, for example, for a database, instead of using a proprietary database, trying to stick with Postgres or with MySQL or MongoDB, let's say, for example, even if it's Mongo is a strange one. But the message here is that stick with the open source version of the information, even of the tool, even if it's managed, because you can have a managed Postgres, but it's still open source, so you can, whenever you want, whenever you feel it, download your data and move your application to another cloud provider, or even on-premise back.
Okay, so it's kind of a little bit more trying to resist the appeal of some of the sort of services that are provided by the public cloud provider, and actually kind of rolling your own, or maybe using even like a as a service solution.
Yeah, indeed. Or even use it like if you really want to adopt something like that, use it in a clever way. Let's say you create a kind of, especially if you're a developer, a wrapping script around a given, let's say, messaging service. And if you feel you need to go away from that messaging service, you refactor that only the class, the interface class, to point to the new service.
Sure. Okay. So yes, otherwise it's kind of obviously it's going to be sort of out of the frying pan and into the fire. Pretty much, if you kind of take it from one database and put it into another, sort of managed database. Okay.
So I was somebody saying that it might be that your cloud provider could be the next mainframe. So you should really
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, it doesn't really solve anything if you do that. Okay, and the other of the six, well, second of the six pillars is you saying move everything non-strategic to the cloud if it reduces TCO. So kind of you talked about kind of cherry picking applications. So talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, the thing is that if you're struggling to move to the cloud or doing any cloud adoption at all, the best thing is to get everything that gives you an headache and is not strategic to the cloud, so that actually relieves your pain a bit. So
Sure.
again, when it comes to therapy, and we call it, by the way, I'm a pilot, okay? And one of the things that when you're an airline pilot is workload management and the situation awareness.
Right.
So in IT as well, you're so focused on doing things, then you lose the situation awareness. So to put down your workload, you just move what is not strategic, maybe a web server, or maybe something you don't, I wouldn't say you don't care, but is not really core to your business to the cloud, and ready if you're paying for a while, but only if it does make sense. Because if, for example, if the TCO of the solution that includes people as well, will end up costing more than having on-premise, it's not worth it. So it's always that when it comes to cloud adoption, you have to balance if it's really worth it or not.
Okay, so that's kind of focusing on the kind of the strategic and how sort of simple those that sort of migration would be. How about the actual complexity within the application? Would you say it's probably easier and maybe it makes more sense to do an easy application to migrate, or kind of a more complex one to prove the point?
No, I mean, proving the point going straight to the complex one is not really worth it, because you end up, I'll tell you, you'll end up hitting a wall, because you spend a lot of time, you spend a lot of money, you spend a lot of energies, and you probably don't have a clue. So the good thing is that use something simple and learn from that, because actually the real process on the real problem of getting into the cloud is learning the platform, learning the tools, because we are talking about DevOps now, okay, and building pipelines, for example. So you need to be acquainted with these new tools before, and if you do that with a complex application, you screw up.
Sure.
Okay. Which actually linked to the other point as well.
Yeah. Okay. So and you kind of mentioned also a little bit about sort of customer sort of psychological state and demeanor as well. What's your kind of what's the sort of the comment on that?
Yeah, the thing is that sometimes okay, it really depends. There is no one solution for a customer. It really depends on the environment, what the customer is up to, and especially the IT, which pressure they have on. So it's here that you actually became a kind of therapist and trying to understand and all the challenges that the IT department is going through, and the challenges the people, so the whole team is going through, and then of course depends on what's the status and the background of the team and etc. before deciding which application I should shift to the cloud.
Okay, and then in terms of SaaS, when should we SaaS and not SaaS?
Oh, that's actually a really great question. Again, SaaS is really appealing. I mean, but because you actually adopt something and you don't care about upgrading the OS or upgrading the application. Everything is managed and is absolutely brilliant. But I believe it's brilliant for let's say up to a mid type of enterprise, mid-size enterprise, because then let's say, for example, I'm sorry, hopefully I won't upset anybody, but Salesforce is a great example of that. Okay, Salesforce is like SAP. If you customize it a lot, probably is not really worth it. It depends. Okay, but if you spend a lot of time, energies, and you have to pay a lot of licenses, you have to understand if is it worth it for me? Is it okay for me? Probably I should adopt this SaaS, but not in full. Maybe something I'll keep it in, in-house. I'll develop my own custom solution. It really depends. What I really want to stress: when you adopt a SaaS, make sure that you can extract the data in an open format, because otherwise you'll be locked in again in another tool.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, SaaS is kind of right on the other end of that sort of shared responsibility model. It's kind of more, you're effectively a consumer, of those types of platforms.
Yeah, and the thing is that since I wrote the book, so things are changing a bit, and it seems like the market, especially from a given size of companies, are moving to the adoption of consuming application and consuming data rather than building their own or managing their own. And it does make sense, but again, has an impact on the IT anyway.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, SaaS, I think, has kind of expanded in terms of capabilities. There's now things like backup and recovery, AI type of platforms, and so on. So certainly, it's an appealing sort of solution that enterprises can go to. Excellent. Okay, so the third one that you talk about, third pillar, is keep it simple when you can. So this is all about sort of cost effectiveness being part of the strategy for migration. And can you talk a little bit more about sort of how that is? I think you have in the book you have a manufacturing company example. So you can kind of talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, this is really one of the points. Is actually number 3, but is actually my favorite one, because people tend to over-engineering a lot, especially, and I'll say for us technicians, we like things. We like complexity somehow. We like to experiment, so we go and do complex things because we want to be proud and we want to test it.
Yeah.
But however, that involves, having complexity means complex to manage. You need to have more people. You need to be able to cope with that and be ready for that. And also, which is not for everybody, to be honest. And also you can have more control over your spending and in general more control of IT if you keep it simple. Okay, one of the example is in my book is a manufacturing company. We're trying to reduce the number of application and creating even simpler but effective application in the cloud. So things have moved since I wrote this book, but basically we are trying to avoid as much as we can the operating system. So we are using Kubernetes clusters. We use a lot of security embedded both in the pipelines and everything. The tools provide us,
right? And
everything that could be simpler, not complex, but reduce the amount of operations needed, and also the number of machines needed as well.
Right. Yeah. So kind of overall sort of avoid over-engineering effectively.
Yeah, and unfortunately, this is probably the worst point that when I go to a customer, I have to face. Because things are a lot engineered, they like to over-engineer. Again, it's goodwill anyway, but don't realize that things sometimes could be easier. If I may, I would like to give an example of another development company, a software. They develop something like document manager system for some finance. And they are creating a kind of message-driven architecture for their platform. But I mean, they have a lot of installations, but most of the time they don't have many users in the platform. So what's the point of creating a message-driven architecture for something like 20 concurrent users? You know what I mean? Something like
Yeah, it sounds
They're
like it's
very
a kind of overkill. Yeah, I agree with that.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and then of course, if you do this kind of architecture, brings up the costs with the messaging service and everything else. So
and complicate the architecture. Absolutely.
exactly.
Okay. So pillar 4 that you have, the fourth pillar, is automate whatever you can. So this is kind of around provisioning and compliance. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, of course. Again, one of the things I've seen in companies that many of them are still doing things manually. Okay, that lead to human error, which can be, about losing time when bringing from QA to production or pre-production, all the environments, mistakes in the configuration file, and worst of all, security issues.
Yeah,
because a misconfiguration will likely bring to security issue, some data, or even simple password exposed and everything else. If you automate things and you do things properly, again, keeping it simple, you can try to avoid human mistakes. So and minimize as much as you can. So if you automate as much as you can, you have a repeatable process. Then you can check on development, QA, pre-prod, and prod, and then you are pretty sure then that you kind of reduce the human factor when it comes to deployment.
Sure. And also in terms of sort of automating things like provisioning, so on, it also means that you can stand up another environment if you want to expand or scale, or open to a new market, for example, much more easily and quickly.
Yeah, and even even moving to another cloud provider, and that is somehow linked to disaster recovery as well. If you have everything automated, you can decide to, I had a problem with Ireland, then I switched to Frankfurt, or I changed my mind, or I want to have a new test environment because I'm not 100% sure it's working well. And then you have all the recipes, and you can go.
Okay, yeah. I mean, just one point I actually realized is that your sort of the order that you put these in is almost kind of each one cascades into the next one along. So as you kind of said, the automating, that's fine, but actually keep it simple, which is the previous point, and also continue to use open standards. So you can move it around in multi clouds as well, which is great. So I think that's a great way to put it. So just touch a little bit on the same point again. It's kind of around automation and so on. But what do you mean kind of in terms of compliance in the book? Because you do mention that.
Yeah, it's is that the fact that you have to be compliant usually with audits, with some security standards, and with your maybe your assets as well. So if you automate, and if you run, for example, an Ansible script or a playbook, and you ensure that everything is as expected. Because again, sometimes the common mistake is that, we're in a rush, we're in production, we need to fix something quickly, and you forget an open SSH, or you forget something else, then you're basically screwed. Especially because you forget. Maybe nobody is stealing any data, or you're lucky enough, but an audit came out, and then you said, oh, there's a problem here, there's a problem that I have to patch this, I have to patch that.
Sure.
If you automate everything, you don't really care about it. Let's say, for example, nowadays it's not covered in this book because again, a lot happened in the last year. But
yeah, of course.
If you run a pipeline and you build a Docker container, well, a container in general, and you ensure that, for example, you out-upgrade the OS in the container, you out-upgrade your dependencies, you do run, for example, I do many Python stuff. So you run Bandit to understand if you have a static security problem into your code. And you check that automatically check that your container is has no CVs, known CVs, then you expose it, you reduce the exposed security risks automatically and without doing anything.
Yeah, I understand. So kind of trying to shift security left as much as possible, but also would you say kind of regulation as part of that sort of compliance as well? Because a lot of kind of enterprises moving from data center into the cloud have to think about that as well.
Yeah, of course. I mean, this is another flip of a coin, and the other side is that with better security, you of course be compliant with some policies that could be an ISO standard or a security standard or any standard at all, because you already coded everything into let's say a procedural playbook or a definition file. So you're not 100% sure, but it's something like you're 98% sure you would pass the audit of a standard anyway.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, excellent. So the fifth pillar that you have is called take a kind of a zero trust approach to security. We were just talking about security. So I think there's kind of a lot of sort of problems, and correct me if I'm wrong on this. Maybe things have kind of slightly moved on as well in kind of terms of sort of where things are. But I think there's probably a couple of problems sort of where customers are not sort of really understanding security very well. So whether that's actually in the data center or actually moving into the cloud. And also the industry's kind of muddied the waters a little bit. It's kind of made that sort of whole cybersecurity, as it's called, which I think is a over-abused term, in terms of kind of, trying to define what security is and kind of how it can be sort of all-encompassing, and using, I think, words like cybersecurity. Yes, it's an umbrella term, but it's also kind of a much abused term in my opinion. So what's kind of your take on that?
I do agree with you. It's super abused. I don't like the way they use it. I have a strong security background, of course, and but as you can imagine, I didn't work with any security vendor because, of course, they try, but it's normal. They try to sell you a product, and the thing is that cybersecurity can mean everything to cover and sell the product, which is not a negative thing by itself, but it really depends on your needs. So what I really don't like is that people still think that a firewall would do, even in the cloud. I've witnessed deployment of traditional firewalls on AWS and in Google Cloud, or even Azure, okay, which is oh, okay. It's okay for shift
not very cloud native, is it?
No, no, definitely not.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, and this is really has been always like that in security. People think that security is a product. Security can be a product, but it's actually a mindset.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm into kind of firewalls not really being effective any longer. But kind of security, I think I would certainly place as part of the governance piece, and then that in turn is kind of part of a cloud operating model. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, is that with the cloud? I mean, and so things have really shifted. Okay, if you want to really go to cloud, really cloud, not really. I use the cloud as another data center, but cloud. Is that what I'm witnessing now, and especially after this pandemic, is that you can be everywhere on this planet and still using the service. And for that reason, the traditional model doesn't work at all. Okay, you have to think in a different way. You have to think everything you do can be sniffed, can be dropped, and everything else. So you need to think that data is not secure from your device, can be a mobile device, can be an iPad, can be a PC, up to the data center. Before you say, oh, I got a firewall, I use a VPN, I'm fine. No, you're no longer in that position. You have to think that if you especially if you do your own application, you have to be careful. And then again is linked to the other points as well. You have to be sure that your application is secure by design inside, and you shouldn't rely on external tools to do that. You should check every single input and validate it.
Sure.
And also for security between microservices, for example. And now we are talking about microservices. Okay. If one user is talking to one microservice and the other one through, for example, a JavaScript application, anyone can be a Vue application or whatever, then the two microservices are not talking to others. So you have to trust the JWT, and you have to make sure that the JWT, which is the token that with which the user exchange information, is secure enough. So it's another way of approaching security, and requires extra skills. And the message I wanted to give to, especially to the readers of Facebook, is that you don't need to trust firewalls anymore, and you need to think in another way to deliver your stuff. And more, as a matter of fact, rather in the manufacturing company, we are talking about even local networks, especially in the offices, are just doing NAT to the internet. So there's no real kind of, you may filter some ransomware or whatever, but the main security is elsewhere, because the same endpoint can be used at home or in a coffee shop.
Sure. Okay, cool. All right. So the sixth pillar that you have is keeping, what you say, keep multiple backups in open format. So can you kind of define sort of open format in kind of your, what the book kind of definition of that?
Yeah, it's that open format. I understand can be misleading. So the thing is that open format is something like you can actually open and see the data. So something like a CSV, a dump, a zip file, or whatever. It's not just a proprietary dump of a given software, but a true, honest, machine readable data that you can either move to somewhere else, or you can read and let's say transform to other kind of data, like for example a CSV dump of again for Salesforce, a CSV dump of your address book or whatever.
Sure. Okay. And in terms of actual sort of backup and recovery, what would you say? Is it kind of, are we kind of heading towards what various vendors kind of call things like cloud data management, where that sort of whole backup and recovery sort of policy is really dealt with by another third party, a SaaS? Or would you kind of still be looking at things like rsync and stuff like that, kind of very, very basic sort of approach to it?
Yeah, I'm an old-fashioned guy, so I like the rsync like.
The rsync, yeah.
Kind of rsync like. I mean, I'm not saying that cloud data management wouldn't be wrong, but I really like to be able to be fully able to recover all my infrastructure with my own data. Let's say, for example, I'm talking about a bank. I believe, it was one of the example in my book, a bank. Okay, we moved everything to the cloud, but still there is a kind of next generation NAS in the main headquarter. So you can kind of, with all the scripts, dump everything on the cloud, everything, let's say, even for VMs, having them in a kind of open format, so that if I want to, let's say tomorrow my cloud provider is disappearing, or for example, there's a new regulation that you have to bring back everything you don't know, for example, can happen. Let's say Brexit, for example, was one thing. Then you say, okay, tomorrow, if everything goes wrong, I can rebuild my own data center with my own data.
Sure. Okay. All right. Yes. I mean, I think a lot of this is kind of also around, that sort of recovery point objective, recovery time objective, the RPOs and sort of RTOs of that as well. So I think probably, you certainly mentioned that in the book. So it's kind of important to, for customers to have that in mind. Excellent. Okay. So, we've kind of covered sort of the migration or adoption sort of processes. Well, what about sort of the kind of maybe kind of stepping back a little bit, looking at the sort of the bigger picture? What's kind of your opinion on things like IT processes? How are these kind of affected by migration to cloud, for example?
Well, that's actually the most difficult part of a cloud journey. So adopting a cloud from a technical perspective is, I wouldn't say simple, but there are tools, there are guidelines, best practices that you can follow. But then the real challenge for a company is changing the way IT is conceived. Because in most of the companies I've witnessed, especially we're talking about big companies anyway, not small companies. Big companies, IT is kind of super busy, and the complaint I see from the top management, because I always also do consulting for CEO or C-levels in general, is that IT is not coping with the speed of a business, because of course we are talking about a business, either manufacturing or finance or whatever. It's still a business, and IT is now kind of not coping with every single project in the company. So adopting the cloud could shift this thing and kind of ease the pressure on IT, but the role of IT has to change.
Thank you very much for watching this talk. If you enjoyed the content, please comment, share, like, and subscribe to support the channel. See you next time.